I haven't seen a snowplow in 3 days. The road at the end of the driveway is gone, just a smooth, white scar cutting through the tree line. It is beautiful in that way that deadly things often are. But the silence is the worst part. The snow muffles everything, cars, birds, the wind, until the only thing you can hear is the blood rushing in your own ears. I thought being home alone during a blizzard would be cozy. Fireplace, whiskey, old books. But about an hour ago, the motion sensor light on the back patio flickered on. I froze, my glass halfway to my mouth. I told myself it was a deer, maybe a stray dog looking for warmth. But when I walked to the sliding glass door and cupped my hands against the cold pane, there's nothing there. Just the empty yard and the snow falling straight down like static. I waited for the light to click off. It didn't. 10 minutes later, I saw him. He was standing at the very edge of the woods, right where the light fades into the black. He wasn't dressed for this weather. No coat, no hat, just a flannel shirt and jeans, soaked through and frozen stiff. He wasn't shivering. He was just standing, facing the house. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I yelled through the glass, asking what he wanted, telling him I had a gun, even though I don't. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just took one step forward into the light. And that's when I saw his face. It was wrong. It was smooth, too smooth, like wet clay that hadn't quite set yet. And he was smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. It was just a wide, impossible gash, showing too many teeth. I locked the deadbolt. I checked the windows. I ran to the kitchen to find my phone, but the signal was dead, buried under 6 feet of atmospheric pressure. When I went back to the living room, he was closer. He had covered 50 yards in seconds without leaving a single footprint in the pristine snow. He was pressing his face against the glass now. His breath didn't fog the window. He was just staring at me with those wide, unblinking eyes, tapping on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Not a frantic knock. A polite, rhythmic tapping. Like he was keeping time to a song only he could hear. I backed away, tripping over the rug, and scrambled backward until my back hit the hallway wall. The power cut out exactly at midnight. The hum of the refrigerator died, plunging the house into a heavy, suffocating darkness. The only light came from the dying embers in the fireplace, casting long, twisting shadows across the floor. I held my breath, listening. The tapping had stopped. For a moment I thought maybe he had gone. Maybe the cold had finally taken him. But then I heard it. The sound of the front door handle turning, jiggle, click. It was locked. I knew it was locked. But then I heard a sound that made my blood turn to ice water. From the other side of the door, a voice spoke. It wasn't a stranger's voice. It was my voice. Perfect pitch. Perfect cadence. It whispered, "It's cold out here. Let me in. I promise I won't bite." And then the deadbolt slid open with a sharp metal clack. The heavy oak door didn't slam open. It drifted inward with a slow, agonizing creak that seemed to last for a lifetime. I didn't stay to see it swing wide. I scrambled backward into the kitchen, my socks slipping on the hardwood, and shoved myself into the narrow pantry, pulling the door shut until only a sliver of the dark hallway was visible. The air in the house changed instantly. It wasn't just the cold, it was the smell. It smelled like wet earth and old stagnant ice. And then came the footsteps, They didn't sound like boots on wood. They sounded like wet meat being slapped against the floor. Slap, drag, slap, drag. He was inside. He was standing in the foyer, right where I had stood just moments ago, probably looking at the wet prints I'd left behind. My own voice called out again, vibrating from a throat that shouldn't exist. "I can smell the whiskey," the voice said, sounding so much like me it made my stomach turn. "It's a good year. You always had, expensive taste." I held my breath until my lungs burned, watching through the crack in the pantry door. A shadow blocked the light from the fireplace. He moved into the kitchen, his silhouette jerky and wrong, like a film with missing frames. When he passed through the faint orange glow of the embers, I saw his profile. His head was tilted at a 90-degree angle, resting almost flat against his shoulder. Yet he walked as if he were perfectly upright. His skin looked like shrink-wrapped plastic, pulled too tight over a skull that was slightly too large. He didn't look for me in the cabinets or under the table. He went straight to the refrigerator. He opened it, the light spilling across the floor, and he just stared at the food. He picked up a carton of milk, sniffed it, and then began to pour it onto the floor, watching the white liquid spread across the dark tile with a look of intense, clinical curiosity. "The power's out," he whispered, still using my voice. But now it was distorted, like a record playing at the wrong speed. "Everything is going to spoil. You, me, the house. We're all going to turn sour in the dark." He dropped the carton and turned toward the pantry. I pulled back, pressing my spine against the shelves of canned goods, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. I heard him move closer. The slap-drag sound stopped, right outside the pantry door. I could hear him breathing. It was a wet, rattling sound, like air being pushed through a straw. Then the tapping started again. Tap, tap, tap. On the wooden door, just inches from my face. "I know you're in there," he said. "I can hear your heart. It's so loud. It's the only thing in this house that's still warm. Why won't you share it?" The door handle began to turn, slowly, deliberately. I grabbed a heavy can of peaches, ready to swing, ready to die fighting. But the door didn't open. Instead, I heard the sound of something tearing, like wet fabric being ripped apart. I peeked through the crack one last time and saw the most horrific thing of all. He wasn't trying to get in. He was changing. His skin was bubbling, shifting, melting. The smooth, clay-like features were sharpening into a nose, a chin, a jawline. My nose, my chin, my jawline. He was growing hair, dark, messy hair, just like mine. He reached up with hands that were finally becoming human and straightened his head until it clicked into place. He looked at his reflection in the dark window, adjusted his collar, and practiced a smile. Not the wide, horrific gash from before, but my smile, the one I use for photos, the one I use when I'm nervous. He turned away from the pantry and walked toward the living room, his footsteps now sounding perfectly normal. He sat down in my favorite armchair, picked up my book, and began to read by the light of the dying fire. I am still here. I am still in the pantry. The sun is starting to come up, and I can hear a snowplow in the distance, finally clearing the road. I hear my neighbor's truck pull into the driveway. I hear him knock on the front door, calling out my name to see if I'm okay after the storm. And I hear the thing in the living room stand up, walk to the door, and answer it. "I'm fine, Bill," it says, perfectly cheery, perfectly human. "Just a bit of a cold night. Come on in. I'll put the coffee on." I want to scream. but I know if I make a sound, the me on the other side of the door will stop smiling. And I don't think Bill is ever going to leave this house. They don't tell you about the cabin fever in the recruitment brochures for the National Park Service. They talk about the majesty of the pines, the crisp mountain air, and the noble duty of protecting the wilderness. But they don't mention what happens when a level 5 blizzard pins you inside a 12 by 12 fire lookout tower for 10 days straight. The Blackwood Ridge is beautiful in the summer, but in February, it's a graveyard of ice. My only contact with the outside world is a crackling shortwave radio and the occasional strobe of a distant plow on the valley floor, 3,000 feet below. I've spent the last 48 hours watching the snow climb the legs of this tower. It's reached the catwalk now. I'm not just isolated, I'm entombed. And that's when I saw the first set of tracks. I was clearing the frost from the north-facing window when I saw them. Large, heavy imprints in the fresh powder circling the base of the tower. At first I thought bear, but the gait was all wrong. The steps were too far apart, perfectly bipedal and deep, as if whatever made them weighed 500 pounds. They didn't lead toward the forest, and they didn't lead away. They just circled, around and around, like a predator pacing a cage. I grabbed my binoculars, my breath hitching in my throat, and followed the trail. The tracks ended abruptly at the base of the steel ladder. There were no return prints. Whatever had made them was either still directly beneath me, or it had started to climb. The radio crackled to life then, spitting out a burst of static that sounded like a scream. I fumbled for the handset, desperate for the voice of the dispatcher at the base station. But it wasn't the dispatcher. It was a recording of my own voice from the logs I'd submitted 2 hours ago. All quiet on Blackwood, my voice whispered through the speaker. Visibility near 0. No signs of activity. But the recording didn't stop there. It began to distort, the pitch dropping into a low, guttural growl. Visibility 0, it repeated. No signs of life. I slammed the power switch on the radio, but the voice kept going, now coming from the vents in the floor. It sounded like something was trying to learn how to speak by chewing on my words. Then came the scratching. It didn't start at the door. It started under the floorboards, right beneath my feet. A slow, rhythmic scraping of bone against metal. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Something was hanging onto the underside of the lookout cabin, suspended 300 feet in the air in the middle of a gale. I retreated to the center of the room, clutching my flare gun, my eyes locked on the trapdoor in the floor. The scratching stopped. For a long, agonizing minute, there was only the howl of the wind. Then, a soft, polite knock at the window. I turned, my heart stopping in my chest. A face was pressed against the triple-paned glass. It had no skin, just a wet, gray musculature stretched over a human-shaped skull. It didn't have a nose or ears. It just had eyes. Vibrant, intelligent, human eyes that looked exactly like mine. It didn't try to break the glass. It just watched me, its mouth splitting open to reveal rows of needle-thin teeth. It raised a hand, a long, spindly thing with too many joints, and began to mimic my movements. When I raised the flare gun, it raised a finger. When I backed away, it leaned forward. It wasn't just watching me, it was downloading me. I realized then that the blizzard wasn't the disaster. The blizzard was the cover. This thing had been waiting for the world to turn white so it could step into my life without anyone noticing the swap. The radio clicked back on, And this time, the voice was perfect. It was me. "Dispatch, this is Lookout 4, the voice said, sounding cheerful and calm. "The storm is breaking. I'm coming down now. Send the transport to the trailhead." The thing at the window winked at me, then let go, vanishing into the white abyss below. I am still up here. I am screaming into a dead radio. And somewhere down there in the snow, I am walking home. This is part 2 of The Cold Watch. It continues the descent into psychological terror as the narrator tries to reclaim his life from the thing that stole his voice. This script is formatted for the Chris voice in 11 Labs. Deep, breathless, and increasingly desperate. The Cold Watch, Part 2. The silence that followed was louder than the storm. I stood in the center of that vibrating tower, clutching a flare gun that felt like a toy against the primordial hunger I'd just witnessed. The radio was dead again, truly dead this time. But the air still tasted like that thing. It smelled like ozone and wet copper. I knew I couldn't stay. If I stayed, I was just a frozen meal waiting for the spring thaw. I had to get down. I had to reach the trailhead before that. That version of me climbed into the transport truck. I shoved my feet into my boots, grabbed my heavy parka, and kicked open the trapdoor. The wind hit me like a physical blow, a wall of white ice that tried to shove me back into the safety of my coffin. I gripped the frozen metal rungs of the ladder, my breath coming in ragged silver plumes, and began to climb down into the abyss. Every inch was a battle. The metal was so cold, it felt like it was biting through my gloves, trying to fuse my skin to the structure. Halfway down, the wind died for a split second and I heard it. A laugh. My laugh. It wasn't coming from below. It was coming from the air around me, swirling in the snowflakes. "You're late," the voice whispered, vibrating in my very teeth. "They're already here. They like the new you. He's much more cooperative." I looked down, my eyes stinging from the frost, and saw the faint, rhythmic pulse of amber strobe lights through the trees. The transport. It was at the trailhead, half a mile away. I dropped the last 10 feet into the snow, my knees buckling, and began to run. Or at least, I tried to. In 4 feet of powder, running is just a slow-motion crawl toward your own funeral. I reached the tree line, my lungs burning with every gasp of sub-zero air. The woods were different now. The pines didn't look like trees. They looked like jagged teeth reaching out of the earth. And then I saw the prints again. Not just one set, dozens. They were everywhere, circling the trees, leading toward the road, crisscrossing in a frantic, chaotic dance. And in the center of the path, I found it. A pile of clothes. A Park Service uniform, torn to shreds, but not by claws. It looked like it had been shed, like a snake's skin. I picked up the name tag. It was mine. But it wasn't just my name. The photo on the ID was shifting. As I watched, the face in the plastic began to melt, the eyes sliding down the cheeks, the mouth stretching into that horrific needle-toothed grin I'd seen at the window. I burst through the final line of trees just as the heavy transport truck was idling by the gate. The headlights were blinding, 2 twin suns in the white dark. I saw him. I saw me. He was standing by the passenger door, chatting with Miller, the head ranger. He was leaning against the hood, laughing, throwing his head back in that way I do when I'm trying to be charming. Miller was smiling back, handing him a thermos of coffee. I tried to scream. I opened my mouth to shout Miller's name, to warn him, to tell him that the thing next to him was a hollow shell made of winter and spite, but no sound came out. My throat felt like it was filled with dry sand. I clutched my throat, gasping, realizing the finality of the theft. He hadn't just mimicked my voice. He had taken it. He had pulled the sound right out of my vocal cords and left me with nothing but the whistle of the wind. The thing that looked like me stopped laughing. It turned its head, slowly, too far, just like before, and looked directly at the spot where I was shivering in the shadows. It didn't look scared. It didn't look caught. It just smiled. That perfect human smile that I'd practiced in the mirror 1,000 times. It raised a hand and pointed at me. Miller turned, squinting into the dark, his hand dropping to the holster at his hip. "Who's there?" Miller shouted, his voice tight with suspicion. I stepped into the light, my hands raised, my mouth opening and closing in a silent, pathetic plea. But Miller didn't see his friend. He didn't see a man in distress. He saw a shivering, frost-covered shape with no voice, lurking in the woods like a predator. "Stay back," Miller yelled, drawing his weapon. The thing that stole my life stepped up beside him, putting a comforting hand on Miller's shoulder. "Careful, Miller," it said in my perfect, warm voice. "The storm does strange things to the animals up here. Sometimes they forget they're supposed to be afraid of us." The truck door slammed shut. The engine roared. And as they drove away into the white, I watched my own face looking back at me through the rear window, waving goodbye. The parents didn't seem worried about the weather. They offered me $800 to stay the night while they drove to a private gala 3 towns over, even as the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise and the first flakes began to stick. Mrs. Sterling just squeezed my hand, her palms strangely cold, and pointed toward the nursery at the top of the stairs. "Don't wake Leo," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the ceiling. "He's a light sleeper, and he doesn't like to be interrupted when he's dreaming." They left before I could even ask for the Wi-Fi password, their taillights vanishing into the white wall of the blizzard within seconds. Now it's just me, the ticking of a grandfather clock that seems to be slowing down, and the wind howling like a wounded animal against the siding. I checked on Leo an hour ago. He's 4 years old, but he was sitting perfectly upright in his crib, staring at the wall in total darkness. He didn't turn when I opened the door. He just said, "The snow is hiding the exits, Sarah. Can you feel it?" I haven't been back upstairs since. The power flickered and died at 10 p.m., leaving me with nothing but a half-melted vanilla candle and the glow of my dying phone. That's when the sound started. Not from outside, but from the nursery. Thump, drag, thump. It sounded like Leo was moving furniture, but he's barely 30 pounds. I crept up the stairs, the wood groaning under my feet like it was in pain. When I reached the landing, the nursery door was wide open. The room was freezing, colder than the outside air. Leo wasn't in his crib. He was standing by the window, his silhouette stretched long and jagged against the frosted glass. I called his name, my voice trembling, and he turned around. But it wasn't a 4-year-old boy. His limbs were too long, his elbows bending at impossible angles, and his face was the stuff of nightmares. His eyes were where his mouth should be, and a wide weeping slit was opened across his forehead, blinking at me with a wet, human iris. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat felt like it had been filled with liquid nitrogen. The thing that was wearing Leo's pajamas took a step toward me, its movements twitchy and unnatural, like a stop-motion puppet. "The parents aren't coming back, Sarah," it said, and the voice was a sickening mosaic of a child's giggle and a grown man's roar. "They didn't go to a gala. They went to the cellar. They've been in the cellar for a long, long time. They just needed someone to stay with me until the transition was complete. Someone fresh." It tilted its head, and I saw the skin on its neck begin to ripple and tear, revealing a gray, oily substance underneath. It wasn't just a demon, it was a parasite, and it was outgrowing its host. I backed away, stumbling toward the stairs, but the floor seemed to stretch, making the hallway a mile long. The thing, Leo, didn't run. It just crawled onto the ceiling, its fingers clicking against the plaster like insect legs. Click-clack, click-clack. I made it to the kitchen and grabbed the heavy iron bolt on the cellar door, thinking I could hide. But then I remembered what it said. I smelled it then. The scent of rotting meat and old copper coming from behind the wood. I pressed my ear to the door and heard a faint, rhythmic scratching from the other side. "Sarah," a voice whispered from the dark below. It was Mrs. Sterling. "Is that you? Please, don't let him see you cry. He feeds on the salt." The candle on the counter hissed and went out. In the total darkness of the kitchen, I felt a small, cold hand slip into mine. It felt like a child's hand, soft and delicate, but the grip was like a steel vise. I could hear the wet, blinking sound of that forehead eye right next to my ear. "It's okay, Sarah," the thing whispered, its breath smelling of winter and graves. "You don't need to see to be a part of the family. Just hold still. The first part only stings for a second. I can feel the skin on my own face starting to itch now. I can feel my jaw shifting, my teeth lengthening, my eyes sliding down my cheeks. The snow is still falling. The house is silent. And I think I'm starting to like the dark." I woke up on the cellar floor, but the floor didn't feel like wood or stone. It felt soft, like breathing leather. The darkness down here isn't empty. It's thick, like a liquid that fills your throat and ears until you forget what the sun looks like. I tried to touch my face, but my fingers felt wrong, too long, too thin, with extra knuckles that clicked like dry twigs. That was when I heard the whispering again. It wasn't just Mrs. Sterling. There were dozens of voices, a chorus of hushed, wet sounds coming from the corners of the basement. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen was shattered, emitting only a faint, flickering blue light. In that stuttering glow, I saw them. The Sterlings weren't tied up. They weren't even crying. They were hanging from the ceiling beams by thin, silver threads of saliva, their bodies stretched out like pulled taffy. Their faces were inverted. The Thatcher effect in the flesh. Their eyes were beneath their chins, their mouths sitting where their brows should be, twitching in a silent, rhythmic pulse. They weren't victims anymore. They were the cocoons. "You're awake just in time, Sarah." The voice of the thing called Leo drifted down from the top of the stairs. I looked up and saw him, or what was left of him. He was no longer a child. He was a pillar of gray, translucent flesh, his many eyes blinking in unison as he descended the stairs without making a sound. The $800. It wasn't for the sitting. It was for the skin. It's so hard to find skin that hasn't been scarred by life yet. Yours is perfect. So elastic. So ready to be reshaped. I tried to crawl away, but the basement floor rippled beneath me, dragging me back toward the center of the room. I looked at my reflection in a puddle of snow melt on the floor and screamed, but the sound that came out wasn't a scream. It was a high-pitched digital whistle. My eyes had migrated to my neck. My nose was a jagged hole in my cheek. I was becoming a masterpiece of the wrong. The things on the ceiling began to hatch. I watched as Mrs. Sterling's face split open down the middle, and something sleek and pale stepped out of the husk of her body. It looked exactly like her, but the proportions were just slightly off. The arms an inch too long, the smile a fraction too wide. It walked over to me and knelt down, stroking my hair with a hand that felt like cold marble. "Don't be afraid, Sarah," the new Mrs. Sterling said, her voice sounding like a beautiful melody played on a broken piano. "We're going to the gala now, the real gala, the one where we don't have to hide what we are, and you're coming with us. We just need to wait for the snow to stop so the next girl can find the house." I realized then that the blizzard wasn't a storm at all. It was a veil, a hunting ground. The Sterlings had been doing this for decades, luring in the young and the lonely with the promise of easy money, only to use them as raw material for their family. I looked at Leo, who was now fitting himself into a new set of clothes, my clothes. He was shrinking, his flesh folding and tucking itself until he looked exactly like me. He put on my coat. He picked up my shattered phone. He even mimicked the way I bite my lip when I'm nervous. He looked at the things hanging from the ceiling and nodded. "The snow is clearing," he said in my voice. "The plow is coming. I'll go out and meet the delivery driver. We're going to need more supplies for the winter." They left me there, pinned to the floor as my bones continued to break and reset into their new, horrific geometry. I am the new Mrs. Sterling now. Or at least, I will be once the skin finishes setting. I can hear a car pulling into the driveway. I can hear the crunch of boots on the fresh powder. I can hear the doorbell ring, a cheerful, mundane sound that cuts through the silence of the house. And then I hear my own voice, bright, warm, and perfectly human, answer the door. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," the voice says. "The weather's just dreadful, isn't it? Come on in. Leo's just finishing his dinner. I've got the $800 right here on the counter for you." I want to warn her. I want to tell her to run into the white and never look back. But all I can do is blink my eyes from the hollow of my throat and wait for the basement door to open.